What if the truest measure of wealth wasn't what you keep, but what you give away when you can't afford to? What if a single dollar slid across a chipped counter in a roadside diner were the key that unlocked a fortune, a family secret, and a past that refuses to stay buried? This is the story of Nora Hayes, a tired waitress with $47 to her name, and a younger sister fighting to stay alive. It begins with an old man in a threadbare coat, a cup of black coffee, and a check for $1.75. Nora thinks she's paying a stranger's bill. She isn't. She's answering a question she doesn't know she's being asked by a man whose name carries more power than the Morning Star Tower he built, and whose mistakes cost more than most houses on her street. One quiet kindness, one forgotten receipt, and a secret worth billions stirs awake. Nora Hayes was 27 and already felt 100 years old. Her days at the Meadowlark Cafe, an aging roadside diner halfway between the freeway and a forgotten industrial park, blurred together like an endless reel of cracked linoleum coffee stains and the smell of burnt bacon grease that never really washed out of her hair. To the regulars, she was just the girl with the tired eyes, quick with a refill, slower with a smile. At home, the scene was different, but no less draining. Her younger sister, Emily, 16, lay curled beneath hospital blankets every night, fighting an autoimmune disorder that had turned her body into an unpredictable battleground. The treatments were experimental, ruinously expensive, and only partially covered by the thin insurance they shared from Nora's double shifts. Each week brought a new bill, $1,000 here, $3,000 there, until the numbers stopped being real and turned into something more like threats. Nora's dreams of becoming a book illustrator, bright worlds, bold lines, galaxies she could invent on paper, sat in a cardboard portfolio under her bed. She hadn't opened it in months. The sketch pencils once lined up neatly on her desk now rattled around in a chipped coffee mug, with the word hope fading on the side. She still carried one physical reminder of who she had been before the bills. Before the exhaustion, a small brass locket with a pressed forget-me-not inside her mother's last gift, before cancer took her. She touched it often during her shifts, fingers brushing it like a secret prayer. In the quiet hours between rushes, she would close her eyes and remember her mother's voice. You don't measure your life by what you have, but by what you give away. It was a saying she had heard so often it had become background noise until the day it stopped being a saying and became a test. The Meadowlark itself was a museum of minor despairs. Red vinyl booths cracked open to show yellow foam beneath chrome stools with loose screws that wobbled when customers shifted their weight. The coffee was strong but bitter. The jukebox in the corner hadn't worked since the Obama administration. And yet for Nora, it was both a prison and a sanctuary, the one place where she still felt in control, even if only of the coffee pot and the cash register. On the morning our story begins, Nora's phone buzzed in her apron pocket. Another payment overdue notice from the hospital. She closed the screen with a thumb before Brenda, the other waitress on duty, could catch her looking. Brenda was older, meaner, and fluent in the dialect of survival. She'd been telling Nora for months to stop playing Mother Teresa and protect your pennies. Nora always nodded, then went right on doing the opposite. By 9:30, the breakfast rush had thinned. A pair of truckers left a $1 tip on a $10 tab. A family of 4 argued over the last pancake. And then the door opened, and a gust of February wind brought in a man who looked as though the world had already forgotten him. He paused at the threshold like a ghost, unsure if he was welcome among the living. His coat was tweed, but worn to the thread, his hair a messy crown of gray, his eyes a pale washed-out blue. In one trembling hand he held a flat cap. In the other, nothing at all. He scanned the diner as though measuring it, then slid onto a stool at the counter without a word. Nora felt her fingers drift to the brass locket at her throat as if on instinct. She reached for a menu, poured a glass of water, and walked over. "Morning," she said softly, placing the glass in front of him. "Coffee's fresh." "Want a cup?" He blinked at her, a slow, heavy movement. "Coffee," he rasped, his voice like rustling leaves. "Black." And just like that, a ritual began. Before the Meadowlark Cafe opened its blinds each morning, the corner office on the 50th floor of Harrow Meridian Capital was already lit like a lighthouse. Glass walls, a desk the size of a pickup bed, views that made the river look domesticated. In the chair sat Damon Harrow, a man who believed that numbers properly arranged could bend reality to his will. Damon was 52, trim as a metronome, and sharper than the crease on his navy suit. His cufflinks were platinum. His shoes were mirror black. He spoke in clipped phrases designed to end conversations, not start them. To the business channels and glossy magazines, he was the deal-maker of the decade, the man who turned failing hospitals into lean, patient-centric operations, which was a tidy way to say he squeezed costs until they bled. He was also the heir to a story that had nothing to do with merit. His father, Ellis Harrow, had risen from a hardware store in Ohio to build a real estate and private equity empire. Ellis believed in unions and pensions, in shaking the hand of the janitor first. Damon believed in spreadsheets and efficiencies, and the quiet power of fear. Where Ellis saw community, Damon saw opportunity. Where Ellis built things you could touch, Damon built instruments you could barely understand. The world around Damon matched his preferences. The Harrow Meridian lobby was a canyon of stone and steel, polished floors, tall orchids that never wilted, a reception desk carved from a single slab of walnut. In the conference rooms, the tables were so long that voices arrived with a delay. Coffee arrived in white porcelain, not chipped mugs. Meetings opened with market caps and closed with closing prices. If anyone mentioned people by name, it was usually because they were being replaced. On a Tuesday, while Nora Hayes refilled the sugar caddies and checked the time on a scratched watch, Damon sat across from the chief financial officer of Grantwell Therapeutics, a cutting-edge biotech firm with a promising line of immunotherapies. Experimental. Expensive. The kind of drugs that turned mothers into fundraisers and daughters into line items. Damon wanted Grantwell, not because of the science, because of the patents. Patents were locks. Locks meant keys, and keys meant tolls. He tapped a finger on a projected chart. Reimbursement risk, he said almost gently. We cap it. We throttle trials to markets with stronger payers. We bundle. We get CMS on pilot pricing. We turn the company. Then, we flip it. He didn't say who would carry the cost of that risk. He didn't need to. In Damon's equations, there was no sell for the life of a 16-year-old who needed a drug today, not in the next quarter. The CFO swallowed. There will be headlines, he said. Pushback. Patient groups. Damon gave a small, tired smile. There are always headlines, he said. Headlines fade. EBITDA does not. On his credenza sat a family photo. A wife with camera-ready poise. 2 grown children with the same sharp eyes. A Labrador that looked bored. Damon never noticed that the frame collected a film of dust in a room wiped down twice a day. The cleaning crew knew to leave it alone. Some dust wants to be seen. If Damon was the blade, the sheath around him was equally unforgiving. His head of security, a former federal agent named Keating, ran background checks on anyone who got within 2 steps of Damon's calendar. His general counsel, Victoria Lynn, could turn a subpoena into a speed bump. His assistant, Paige, triaged the world into urgent critical and does not exist. 2 items, Paige said from the doorway. Grantwell Board wants a dinner next week, and your father's foundation called again. They asked for a yes or no on the scholarship expansion. Damon blinked once. Dinner is fine. The foundation is no. Reason if they ask. Market conditions. He didn't look up. Paige hesitated. It's your father's name, and it is my decision, he said. End of conversation. That night, while the city glittered and the river threw back the lights, Damon's driver took him to the Harrow townhouse, a fortress disguised as elegance. Crown moldings, oil portraits, a staircase that curled like a question. At the far end of the dining table sat his mother Ruth, her hair silver, her eyes watchful. She had been the quiet partner to Ellis's rise, the one who kept the books when there were only 3 employees and a rented office over a pizza place. Your father would have said yes to the scholarships, she said, buttering a roll she wouldn't eat. My father didn't have to answer to public markets, Damon replied, and he said yes too often. Ruth placed the knife down. He said yes to people, she said. That was his mistake and his legacy. Damon poured himself water. No wine on weeknights, no sugar after 9, no distractions. Legacy is a story told by those with time to tell it, he said. I do not have time. Across town, in a hospital room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and winter air, Emily Hayes coughed in her sleep. Nora, head down on the rail of the bed, eased a straw to her sister's lips and whispered, I'm here. She did not know that the man who could alter her sister's fate with a phone call was spooning cold asparagus in a room large enough to hold her apartment 3 times over. In the morning, Damon would meet with Keating again. There had been chatter about an elderly man hovering near the building, wearing a coat 15 winters past its prime, watching the comings and goings with a scholar's patience. Keating would ask if Damon wanted the police called. Damon would wave it off with a small flick of his hand. We're not bothered by ghosts, he'd say. He would be wrong. The ghost had a pulse, a ledger of regrets, and a question only a stranger could answer. And he had already asked it. The Thursday lunch rush at the Meadowlark Cafe had always been Nora's least favorite shift. The place filled with a jumble of construction workers, traveling salesmen and frazzled parents, each with their own urgency. The smell of scorched bacon, harsh bleach, and wet winter coats wrapped the room like a second skin. Nora was moving on autopilot feet, aching inside cheap sneakers apron, weighed down by quarters and dimes that felt heavier than silver. She kept one ear tuned to the hospital, waiting for another call about Emily's labs. Then the door opened, and the February wind pushed an old man into the room. The same old man. The same tweed coat. The same pale eyes. He took the same stool at the counter. And as before, he ordered a single black coffee. But this time, the pause between his words was longer, and the tremor in his hands more pronounced. Brenda leaned against the grill with her arms crossed, muttering just loud enough, Here we go again. Saint Nora to the rescue. Nora ignored her and poured the coffee. She placed it in front of him with the same practiced smile, but her heart was hammering. She couldn't shake the feeling she was being watched, tested. For nearly an hour the old man sat without touching his mug. Customers came and went. Dishes clattered. The old radio above the counter coughed out static between country songs. Nora tried to focus on wiping down tables, but her eyes kept flicking to him. He wasn't just sitting, he was observing, measuring. When the lunch crowd thinned to a lull, the old man's elbow brushed a sugar dispenser and sent it spinning off the counter. It landed on the linoleum with a crash, spilling white crystals into a small, glittering mountain. "I'm so sorry," he stammered, his cheeks flushing crimson. "My hands, they don't listen to me anymore." He reached down with trembling fingers, trying to sweep the sugar back into the dispenser. Brenda rolled her eyes theatrically. "Of course, can't even keep his coffee upright." Nora felt the flash of irritation rise in her throat. Her back ached. Her rent was overdue. Emily's new medication cost more than her car. The last thing she wanted was to kneel on the dirty floor, scraping up sugar for a man who couldn't even pay for his coffee. Then she saw his face, not the wrinkles, not the unkempt hair, but the shame. The kind of shame that felt like a mirror held up to her own life. Something in her unclenched. "Don't you worry about it," she said quietly, kneeling with a dustpan. "It happens to the best of us." As she swept, she could feel his gaze fixed on her. Not just embarrassed, but analytical. Like a scientist observing a reaction. When she stood and wiped her apron, he cleared his throat and began counting coins from his coat pocket. 97 cents. Not enough for the coffee, not even close. "I'll bring the rest," he said softly. "I promise." Brenda muttered from the other end of the counter. "I swear, Nora, you're a mark with legs." Nora looked at the pile of coins, then at his worn-out shoes. Her hands trembled slightly. Every rational part of her screamed to stop. She had bills stacked like tombstones. She had nothing left to give. And yet, she heard her mother's voice in her head, soft and insistent. "You don't measure your life by what you have." She pushed the coins back toward him. "Keep it. You might need it for the bus." She rang up the sale on the register and paid for his coffee herself, quick and decisive. "This one's on me too. Don't worry about the sugar." This time, the old man didn't thank her. His cloudy eyes seemed to clear for a heartbeat, revealing a startling sharpness like steel behind mist. "Why?" he asked, his voice suddenly strong. "Why what? Why do you do that?" He nodded at the register. "Twice now. You work for tips. You can't afford to give away your earnings." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Nora's throat went dry. "My mother used to say—" She stopped, then continued quietly. "Sometimes a cup of coffee is more than a cup of coffee." He tilted his head, studying her like a man confirming a hypothesis. He gave a slow, deliberate nod, slipped the coins back into his coat, and left without another word. The bell above the door jingled softly. Brenda slid closer, voice low. "You're insane. He's playing you. Watch. Next week, it'll be $20 for his sick parakeet." Nora didn't answer. She stood looking at the door, her palms pressed to the counter, her locket cold against her skin. Her heart beat slow and heavy. It felt reckless, stupid, and absolutely right. That night, the eviction notice arrived. White paper this time, black letters. Notice to vacate. 30 days to pay or leave. When the hospital called the next morning with bad news about Emily's immune system and a new round of treatments, she nearly dropped the phone. The room tilted. At the Meadowlark, she moved like a ghost in an apron. Every coffee poured felt like a countdown. Every order taken felt like a nail hammered into a coffin she couldn't afford. And then, as snow swirled outside, the old man returned. Not to the counter this time, but to a booth in the corner. He slid into the cracked vinyl as if sinking into an ocean. "Coffee?" she asked, voice flat. "My dear." He began, his voice trembling with something deeper than age. "I am in terrible trouble. I am in terrible trouble," the old man said, folding his hands on the formica as if he were at confession. "It's my granddaughter's birthday. I was to bring a small gift. I lost the money on the bus. Would you lend me $20? I'll repay you next week when my check clears." $20. To Nora, it sounded like a brick added to a collapsing wall. Gas money, groceries, half the copay for Emily's antibiotics. She felt the weight of the eviction notice in her purse as if it were made of stone. She also felt the locket at her throat. The two feelings collided. "Wait here," she whispered. She walked to the back, opened her wallet with numb fingers, and stared at the last two 20s. The practical voice in her head said no. The voice that sounded like her mother said yes. She slid the bills free, returned, and placed them on the table. Then, after a heartbeat, she added a 10 and pushed the 40 toward him. "Get her something that makes her eyes light up," Nora said. "And get yourself dinner." He looked at the money. He looked at her. For a long moment he did not move. Then something in his pale eyes sharpened like fog, thinning to reveal a ridgeline. "Why," he asked, almost a whisper, "you do not have this to spare." Nora felt heat rise behind her eyes. "Because I remember what birthdays felt like when my mother was still alive," she said. "Because I'm tired of a world that makes every kindness a luxury item. Because sometimes a cup of coffee is not a cup of coffee, and a 20 is not a 20. He nodded slowly, as if she had given the answer to a question she could not see. He folded the bills without looking down, slid them into his coat, and stood. He put on his flat cap, then paused. "My name is Ellis," he said. "Ellis Gray." He offered a small, courtly bow that felt out of place in a chipped booth diner. "You'll hear from me." He left before she could reply. The bell above the door tinkled once and fell still. That evening, snow blew sideways across the parking lot. The meadowlark closed early. Nora walked to her car, breath clouding, thinking of the $40 she no longer had, and the glance in the old man's eyes that made her feel both seen and measured. She told herself none of it mattered. She told herself she had been a fool. She also told herself she would do it again. The next morning, the meadowlark's windows caught a weak sun. At 9 on the dot, a black sedan, too sleek for that parking lot, rolled up to the curb. A man in a dark overcoat stepped out. He was not a cop. He was not a customer. He moved with the economy of someone trained to notice exits. "Ms. Hayes," he asked, showing a card. "Keating. I work for Mr. Harrow. He asked me to bring you downtown." Nora blinked. "Harrow," Ellis Keating said. "He prefers Mr. Harrow." Brenda's dishcloth actually fell from her hand. "You're kidding." Nora wasn't sure whether to laugh or run. Why would he want to see me?" "He said you would understand," Keating replied. "And that time matters." Nora glanced toward the hospital app on her phone, then at the clock. If this was a prank, it was an expensive one. If it wasn't, it was an opportunity that smelled like danger. She untied her apron, hung it on its hook, and followed Keating outside. The sedan slid through the city like a shark. Steel and glass rose around them. Keating said nothing. Nora clutched the brass locket and watched her reflection blur in the window, a tired face overlaid on 1,000 offices where 100 decisions were being made without her. They stopped in front of a building she had seen only on the news. Harrow Meridian. The lobby was a cathedral of stone, the air quiet as a library. No chipped mugs here. No wobbly stools. Nora felt small and furious at once. Keating led her to a private elevator. 50 floors up, glass walls opened on a view of the river, and a corner office where the old man from the diner waited, no tweed now, but a perfectly cut suit, whose lines could slice bread. His hair was still unruly. His eyes were still pale. Only the room had changed. "Ms. Hayes," he said, standing. "Thank you for coming. You said your name was Ellis Gray. Nora managed. Keating said Harrow." The old man gave a rueful smile. "Both true. Gray was my mother's name. Harrow is the one this town remembers. I use Gray when I want to find out who is listening to what I say and who is only looking at my shoes." He gestured to a chair. Nora didn't sit. "I owe you an apology," he continued. "Two, in fact. I asked you a question without telling you it was a question, and I let you believe I was helpless when I am anything but. Both are sins where I come from." Nora's heart thumped. "What question?" Ellis opened a slim leather folder and slid a paper across the desk. It was a copy of yesterday's receipt for a single black coffee employee paid. Her own name scrawled at the bottom. "Years ago, Ellis said I built something more complicated than a building. A failsafe. My son runs numbers like a general runs troops. He has made us rich on efficiencies that cut too close to the bone. I tried to slow him. I failed. So I set up something he cannot see on a spreadsheet." He tapped the receipt. "A trust. A legal door. It opens only if the right person turns the key." "I'm not following," Nora said, though a cold, bright feeling pricked at the back of her neck. "This city believes wealth is a dragon guarding gold," Ellis said quietly. "I wanted mine to be a river feeding fields. There is a dormant trust seeded with more money than you can imagine, bound to a set of conditions my attorneys swore were poetic nonsense. The first condition, identify a stranger who gives when giving hurts. A stranger who does not perform goodness for cameras, who does not barter generosity for proximity. Find that person, place their name on the instrument, and the river starts to flow." He turned another page. Nora saw her name typed in a place she did not understand. She saw strings of numbers that looked like account identifiers. She saw the words, "Emergency Access for Compassionate Care, Patent Licensing Authority Conditional," and Grantwell. "Grantwell," she repeated, breath-hitching. "The Immunotherapy Company." Ellis nodded once. "The patents my son wants to squeeze. The treatments your sister needs. The trust was designed to force licensing on humanitarian terms if the key holder deems it necessary. That key holder is not me. It cannot be me. I am compromised by blood and pride. It must be someone who has nothing to gain and everything to lose. Someone like the woman who paid $1.75 and then 40 more without asking for anything in return." Nora stared. The room tilted a little. "You can't be serious." "I am old," Ellis said, "but I'm not sentimental. I have been watching you for weeks, not to trap you, to know whether the receipt was a fluke or a pattern. I saw how you treat the loud customer who complains about bacon. I saw how you speak to the woman who eats alone. I saw you pick up crayons without being asked. This is not a test you pass once. It is a way of moving through the world." Nora's throat tightened. "Why me? There are thousands of kind people." Ellis folded his hands. For a moment, the confident billionaire looked very, very human. "Because the river needs a name," he said, "and it does not need mine." He slid a pen toward her. "If you accept, we move now. We license the therapy. We fund the trials that matter. We pay what must be paid for the people who are drowning. You will have power you did not ask for, and enemies you have never met. You will also have a chance to save your sister." Nora's hand hovered above the desk. Her locket felt heavy as a stone. The thought of Damon Harrow flashed through her mind like a shadow crossing glass. "What are you asking me to be?" she whispered. Ellis's pale eyes were very clear. "The answer to a question I was too late to ask my own children." Nora did not sign that day. She asked for time. She asked for proof. Ellis nodded, almost relieved, and handed her a thin, weathered folder and a flash drive. "Read first," he said, "then decide." That night, in the dim light of her apartment, one working lamp a space heater humming like a tired bee, Nora opened the folder. Old paper. Blue ink loops from another decade. A letter dated 12 years earlier, written in Ellis Harrow's steadier hand, to Ruth and Damon, labeled, "To be read if I lose my way, or if I lose your hearts." Nora read aloud softly, as if the words belonged to a room full of witnesses. "I built more than buildings," the letter began. "I built a name. But a name is not a life. When I started, every deal had a person's face attached to it: Mrs. Kutcher, who wanted a clean clinic, the Vargas boy who needed a bed. Over time, the faces blurred, and the numbers sharpened. If you are reading this, I fear I stopped seeing the people. Or that you stopped. There were ledgers, too. Donor lists from the early years, handwritten notes in the margins, expand, scholarships, hire clinic nurses, no cuts to the janitors. Then a second packet, crisp and clinical internal emails from Harrow Meridian's later years, optimize staffing ratios, delay reimbursements, renegotiate pharmacy contracts with aggressive clawbacks. The signature blocks were tidy. One was Damon's. Nora pressed her lips together. She set the letters aside and opened the flash drive on her old laptop. Video files. In one, Ellis sat in a hospital waiting room beside a stranger's wife. He introduced himself as Ellis Gray and asked about her husband's meds. He listened. He did not speak like a billionaire. In another, he was at a county clinic, ribbon cutting nothing, just standing off to the side, hands in pockets, like a man who knew he had not done enough and wasn't sure how to start. When the laptop screen went dark, the room felt like a held breath. On the nightstand, Nora's phone buzzed. A message from Keating Damon Harrow has convened an emergency board session for 8 a.m. tomorrow. He intends to acquire controlling interest in Grantwell and streamline access. If you wish to exercise the trust's conditional authority, you must do so before the vote. I can get you in. Nora looked at Emily asleep on the couch, a fleece blanket covering thin shoulders, the glow of the TV tracing her cheekbones. Emily stirred. "You okay?" she mumbled. Nora touched the brass locket. "Ask me tomorrow." At dawn, the city streets glittered with frost. Keating met Nora at a side entrance, ushered her through a service elevator and into a corridor thick with carpet and silence. Victoria Lynn, General Counsel, waited with a face that revealed nothing and eyes that revealed too much. "You are about to interrupt a board meeting with a bomb," Victoria said, walking briskly. "There will be shouting. There will be threats. Stay calm. Speak plainly. Keating will keep the room from turning into a scrum. I will keep the law from turning into a weapon. Ellis will stand at your shoulder. Damon will stand in your way." "Why help me?" Nora asked. Victoria's mouth twitched. "Because I remember who Ellis was before the awards dinners, and because I have a niece who needed a drug we couldn't afford." The boardroom was colder than the corridor lit by winter sun that made the river look like scored glass. A line of directors in slate suits, screens, glowing glasses of water sweating on coasters. At the head of the table, Damon Harrow Perfect Tie contained smile called the meeting to order. "Item 1, he said. Resolution to execute immediate control of Grantwell Therapeutics and restructure its payer mix and clinical priorities. He didn't see Nora at first. He saw Ellis, his face altered by a fraction. "You look well," Damon said. It sounded like not a compliment. Older Ellis replied, "and tired of mistakes." Damon's gaze slid to Nora. It paused, assessed, classified. "Ms. Hayes," he said, as if he were reading a reservation that had somehow landed on his calendar. "You appear to be lost." "She's found," Ellis said. He nodded to Victoria. Victoria placed a leather binder on the table and opened it to a tab with Nora's name, per the Harrow Compassionate Access Trust, drafted 2009 and amended 2017. Victoria said, voice even the designated keyholder, may, upon independent finding of demonstrated need, trigger emergency licensing for specific patented therapies, in cases where market mechanisms materially impede access. The keyholder has been identified. A murmur. The directors looked to Damon. Damon did not blink. "This is a private equity firm, not a parish charity," he said. "The market does not bow to sentiment." Nora stepped forward. She didn't mean to. Her feet moved. Her voice rose. "The market can afford a single concession to human life." Damon regarded her, and for a heartbeat, Nora thought she saw fatigue behind the frost. "Ms. Hayes," he said, "your story has reached my desk. You pay for strangers' coffee. You carry a locket. You have a sister who is ill. These are moving details. They are not policy." Something hot leapt in Nora's chest, but when she spoke, it came out steady. "Policy is the story we tell ourselves to feel nothing when we should. Here is mine. Emily Hayes, 16. 2 hospitalizations in the last month, responding to a drug that your board would like to streamline out of reach. Here are the payment notices. Here are the co-pays. Here is the nurse's note. Family struggling. Here is the part you don't have a line item for the way her hands shake when she stands the way she still tries to make me laugh. You want numbers, I brought numbers." She placed copies highlighted in yellow on the table. "The compassionate license reduces your projected return from 11% to 8.2. It also keeps people like my sister alive long enough to buy a birthday cake. That is not sentiment. That is arithmetic that remembers faces." A director coughed. Another stared at the river. Damon's jaw tensed. 8.2 is not our mandate, he said. Ellis spoke quietly. "It was mine before I forgot." He reached into the folder and pulled a letter. His letter, the one Nora had read at her kitchen table. He slid it across the table to Damon and placed a second sheet on top, a notarized amendment naming the keyholder and authorizing immediate compassionate use licenses for Grantwell's immunotherapy line effective upon the keyholder's signature. Damon read the first paragraph. His composure did not crack. His left hand visible only to Nora, and Ellis tightened on the table's edge until the knuckles blanched. "You wrote this in a moment of weakness," he said. In a moment of clarity, Ellis replied. Keating opened the doors. 2 people stepped in. Nora recognized one from an old article, Ruth Harrow Ellis's widow, Damon's mother, a woman who had learned to let silence do the work of a gavel. The second was a man in a nurse's uniform with a hospital badge. He looked out of place among the suits and screens and exactly right for the room they had refused to imagine. Ruth took a chair without waiting to be offered one. She rested a hand on the table. Her fingers were thin, the knuckles knotted by time. "I stayed out of this too long," she said. "Ellis, you should have told me sooner. Damon, you should have listened when I whispered. Ms. Hayes, finish this." The nurse set a folder in front of the directors. "Grantwell Trial 3B Compassionate Cohort," he said. "I have 6 names you can license today. 6 living, breathing people in our city. They are not headlines. They are my patients. He tapped the folder. Page 1. A girl your daughter's age. Mr. Harrow. She likes horses. Her white blood cell counts jumped when she got the dose. We almost had to stop. Page 2. Enough, Damon said too quickly. Not enough, Ruth answered. The room went so quiet, Nora could hear the HVAC key clicking. She felt the locket against her skin warm now from her pulse. Victoria slid the amendment toward Nora and clicked a pen. The trust requires a countersignature from the key holder, she said. It's yours. Nora hesitated. Not because she doubted. Because signing felt like stepping through a door that might not swing back. She looked at Ellis. The pale blue of his eyes held grief and hope in equal measure. Do it, Ruth said, and make us better than our habits. Nora signed. The sound of the pen on paper seemed too small for what it did, but it was enough. Keating handed copies to the directors. Victoria emailed the executed document to the trust administrator and to Grantwell's legal team. On the screen at the end of the table, a red pending flag beside Compassionate License Immunotherapy A3 flipped to green. Green meant go. Damon exhaled through his nose a quiet, measured sound. He looked at Ellis as if across a canyon he had helped widen. You've undercut your own house, he said. Ellis's smile was weary and, for the first time, unguarded. I've opened the windows. Damon gathered his papers. For a long moment, he did not look at Nora. When he finally did, his expression was not contempt. It was calculation. Yes, and something else almost like respect. He refused to admit out loud. The market will punish this, he said. Or adjust to it, Victoria replied. It does that. When people demand it. Ruth stood steadying herself with a hand on the chair. She reached for Ellis's arm. He let her take it. We are done here, she said. And for once, even Damon did not contest the adjournment. In the hallway, Nora leaned against the wall, her legs trembling. Keating handed her a small bottle of water, like it were a medal. You did fine, he said. Ellis turned to her. There is one more thing, he said softer now, as if every hallway had ears. The trust's first disbursement medical bills. It will cover Emily's care through the year. The second tuition, if you want it. I found your portfolio. I liked the fox with the baseball cap. Nora swallowed hard. You went through my apartment. I went through your trash, he said. Old men with regrets make poor boundaries and good promises. Nora laughed, once a short, shocked sound that turned into something like a sob. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Thank you, she said. Not for the money, for the river. Ellis nodded, but his eyes were on the elevator across the lobby, where Damon stood alone staring at the doors. He looked smaller there, less a figurehead than a son with a letter he didn't want to read. The elevator chimed. Damon stepped in. For a second, just a second, he glanced back at them. The blade had met the whetstone. Whether it dulled or sharpened would be another chapter. By evening, the city had thawed a little, as if the sun had bargained for one more hour of grace. Nora stood outside the hospital with a paper cup of vending machine cocoa warming her hands. Upstairs, Emily slept under a soft hum of monitors, a fresh wristband, and a new treatment order already in place. The nurse had said, let's get her started like a coach tying laces before a season opener. Not a promise. A beginning. Across town, in a quiet office that had hosted a war, Ellis watched the river darken to slate. Ruth sat beside him, fingers threaded through his like a stitch-repairing fabric. Victoria routed filings. Keating wrote a brief that was mostly bullet points and one simple sentence. We are doing this because we can, and because we should. Damon read the trust again, start to finish, then placed his father's letter on the desk, as if it were evidence and indictment in one. He did not call. Not yet. Nora walked the corridor to Emily's room with the slow, careful steps of someone learning how to carry hope again. She paused at the window. Emily's cheeks held a hint of color. A nurse checked the IV line, then looked at Nora, the way people look at each other when the stakes are understood, without being named. In Nora's pocket, the brass locket lay warm from her skin. She thought of $1.75 of $40, folded twice of a question hidden inside a coffee cup, and of a river that might finally reach the fields. There would be headlines tomorrow. There would be backlash. There would be men in suits who found a way to call compassion a cost center. But tonight, in the thin space between decision and consequence, the world felt a fraction wider. Nora texted Ellis a single line. "She's resting. Thank you." He replied, "Thank you for answering." Outside, a snowplow groaned down the avenue, clearing a narrow path through the remnants of the storm. Nora touched the locket and whispered to the empty hallway more prayer than thought, "Let this be enough. Let this be the start, not the exception." If a single kindness can tilt the course of a life, what could 1,000 do? And when power has the chance to choose between profit and people, what should it choose? What would you choose?